Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Speaker. As I continue this good fight, as I continue this lobby for my constituents of Chaguanas East and the people of Trinidad and Tobago at large. As I enter this debate on the Appropriation Bill 2024, Madam Speaker, I stand ready to be called pessimistic, but I am firm in my belief that I am here to fight for the poor and vulnerable and be their voice by expressing the realities of what they face in this country. And Madam Speaker, this budget represents an abject failure on this government's ability to address the real challenges affecting citizens. Madam Speaker, have some respect. Madam Speaker.
1 minute. Member for Laventille West, please oblige with the observance of Standing Order 53. Member for Chaguanas East, try and not be distracted. Remember that you are addressing the chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I must commend my colleagues who would have spoken before for their strong contributions, and most importantly, the leader of the opposition, who provided a sharp rebuttal in expressing the realities of what our citizens are experiencing. Her clinical dissertation represents what an administration on this side would undertake with immediate effect upon assumption of office. Madam Speaker, I dare say we did it then and we can do it again. Madam Speaker, and we will do it again. Madam Speaker, I just had the pleasure of listening to the previous speaker. And I want to say that I am not here to defend myself, but I am here to set the record straight. Madam Speaker, I sat for the last couple days and listened to all the speakers who contributed from the other side. And they have all come here patting the backs of each other. Some were even engaged in giving vote of thanks, Madam Speaker, whilst they claim they are doing the best for the vulnerable and leaving no one behind. Madam Speaker, is this the same government? And was that the same minister who spoke before, who told the population that they were being greedy and not needy? Madam Speaker, is that the same government who would have asked our citizens to forsake their macaroni pie? Madam Speaker, is this the same government who asked our citizens to use a coal pot and ride a bicycle? Madam Speaker, this government has shut the doors on the disabled in this country. Madam Speaker, now they are coming for your food cards, and I say to the citizens.
I love the fact that we can hear, but and I'm not at all trying to curtail your passion, but maybe you could control the volume a bit, please.
Sure. My passion is really strong today. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and in trying to justify why they are coming for our citizens' food cards, the Minister of Social Development and Family Services would have just made some serious allegations, bringing my name into it, Madam Speaker. But what I want to say here today, Madam, I have lived a life of service. And nothing will throw me off, Madam Speaker. And yes, Madam Speaker, I worked under the Targeted Conditional Cash Transfer Program. I started off as a caseworker in late 2012. And then I graduated to a laser officer position. Madam Speaker, the minister's behavior in this honorable house today can be described as nothing but irresponsible. Madam Speaker, I dare say I know nothing of what the minister spoke about here today. And I want to tell the Minister of Social Development and Family Services, do not ever try to dirty my name. Madam Speaker, I have worked with both in my tenure working at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. I have worked with both PNM representatives, UNC representatives. Ask any one of them, they would have received the best service from this liaison officer when I worked at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Madam Speaker, I would have worked throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago under the ministry's guidelines. Nothing else but the ministry's guidelines. Madam Speaker, since 2015, this government took office, and today in 2023, they come in to talk about some MasterCard, which I know nothing about. So what happened to the previous years? You now decide to dig in a cupboard? Madam Speaker, this is their justification for their plan to take back the food cards from our citizens and to cut the food card program. Madam Speaker, the minister's contribution and what she stated about me as working in the ministry can be, I really am very upset about the situation. Madam Speaker, it was heavy on insinuation and low on facts. Madam Speaker, if the minister has information like this, then she should take it to the police. And if you are saying it was taken to the police, then you are compromising an investigation here today. Madam Speaker, I want to share something with you and for the purposes of the population air. When I began working at the Ministry of Social Development, do you know the first 3 months, Madam Speaker,
Everybody who hasn't spoken will get an opportunity once they catch my eye. But we owe some respect to the member for Chaguanas East. Please continue.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the first 3 months working at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, when I recognized the workload, I saved every cent of those 3 months, the salaries I would have received for those 3 months, every cent without lunch, drinking water to fill my belly, to purchase a vehicle to do the ministry's work. So when they come here to tell me about I worked and this happened and that happened to try to dirty my name, I say check yourself and get in line. Madam Speaker, what the minister should have been answering today is how under your tenure, so many checks went missing. So many food cards were missing and stolen from a cupboard in the ministry. But you come here today to tell me about cupboard and MasterCard. You cannot even account for food cards missing from a cupboard in a ministry, but come in here to dirty my name. Madam Speaker, I waste no more time on that because, as I said, I do not have to defend myself. I have given my life to national service, hence the reason I am here today, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the presentation of a budget or any suite of government fiscal measures should be a much anticipated event, eagerly awaited upon by the population. It should create excitement, happiness, and eagerness, since some tangible development, Madam Speaker, tangible development policy should be contained in its delivery. However, Madam, at any given budget delivery in this country and the ensuing days under PNM administration, it is usually associated, or let's say predicated, on shock, anxiety, and general depression, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for example, look at gas stations on budget day because of the fear persons have for this government's fiscal measures. Madam Speaker, this period, and I refer to the budget period for citizens, as currently obtains, is replete with a discouraged population, mirrored in doom and gloom, whilst digesting these depressing measures as contained in this 2024 budget presentation. Madam Speaker, what positives exist in this budget? And they are claiming positives exist. What positives exist in this budget for those families post-COVID-19 who are on the breadline? Madam Speaker, there's an absence of sustainable job creation measures. What positives exist in this budget for those families struggling to make ends meet? Madam, the farcical minimum wage increase cannot address their misfortune, and we must face the facts. Madam Speaker, what positives exist in this budget for senior citizens who are in throes of depression as they stretch their inadequate pension checks beyond what is humanly reasonable? Madam Speaker, what positives exist in this budget for the plethora of young persons of school age wiping windshields and engaged in huckster activities at the various intersections along the nation's major roadways? What hope does this budget offer for them? Madam Speaker, what positives exist in this budget for the farmers of Chaguanas East and this country to encourage increased food security? Madam Speaker, absolutely none. Rather, Madam Speaker, there continues to be old age problems with no incentives or solutions in sight. Madam Speaker, this budget may be good for them on the other side, but not for the population. Madam Speaker, this budget and the PNM government promises continue to fail miserably in addressing the existing and emerging social problems plaguing the nation. Those opposite continue to live in some type of paradise, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today this country is beset by the following: lowering of real incomes, beset by the following: rising unemployment, rising cost of living, continuous escalation of criminal activities, deterioration of the social fabric of the society at the level of family and community. Madam Speaker, despite the country being ravaged by these factors, since the PNM assumed office, it has now dawned on them to develop themes and medium-term goals as stated on page 14 of the Social Sector Investment Program. Madam Speaker, they are now looking at the national social situation and trying to put together goals 1 to 5, then 1 to 3 in terms of themes as it relates to dealing with the real issues that affect people. Madam Speaker, in other words, what they have now recognized is that poverty, crime, health, and education is the cornerstone since they have created their visionless 2030 document. Madam Speaker, and where these emanate from, all of these emanate from the failed policies of the PNM. Nothing but the failed policies of the PNM. Madam Speaker, this society that we currently live in is a society where the common concerns would reflect that we are all second-class citizens. And the reason for this is that the government has never pursued policies in the function of real democracy, social justice, and class equality, but they rather pursued policies solely dedicated to keep them in power, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is quite stunning that in the face of social deterioration and the collapse of the social services and even the collapse of the society, that this government has the temerity to commend themselves for fiscal prudence and economic foresight, as stated in page 12 of the budget statement, when over their history, Madam Speaker, they would have frittered away the wealth of this country. Madam Speaker, it is about time that we examine the reality and look at what is in this budget 2024. Madam Speaker, where in this budget is there provisions that the sick and elderly can afford vital and basic drugs from the pittance they receive as old age pension. Remember CDAP, Madam Speaker? CDAP is a failure because at most times the medications are unavailable for whatever reasons. Madam Speaker, now you know what they're saying. Sometimes when you go to the health institutions, the pharmacies at the health institutions, oh, that is expensive. We cannot provide you with that. And I get that a lot in my very own constituency. Madam Speaker, this is not me saying this. Guardian article dated March 21st, 2023. Headline, pensioners worried as hospitals run out of chemo drugs. And we must listen to Mr. Lewis, who said, after spending his teaching life, Woodbrook pensioner David Lewis is now worried about his fate as public hospitals are out of the much-needed chemotherapy drug Xeloda. With senior citizen pension at $3,500, Lewis says it would cost him $4,000 for a regimen of tablets for just one of 3 sessions. Madam Speaker, at times, our senior citizens, they are forced to forego medicine in order to buy food, since the cost of both are extremely astronomical, Madam Speaker. Yet those opposite delude themselves that everything is okay. We are doing well. This government is doing well. They delude themselves, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what about labor when we examine the realities? Where in this budget is there provisions for labor? How many citizens are unemployed? A situation that has exacerbated post-COVID-19, Madam. How many graduates and young people are underemployed and or seeking to migrate to potential greener pastures, thus compounding, Madam Speaker, the brain drain issue plaguing this nation. And Madam, again, this is not me saying this. Guardian article dated 7th, 2023. Headline, unemployment rate leaves people distressed. Job seekers, and I quote, job seekers from across the country said that the labor market feels hopeless, with many people who have degrees forced to take up jobs that they are overqualified for. At fast food restaurants, Madam Speaker, or security agencies, just to make ends meet, Madam Speaker. And yesterday, the Minister of Labour wanted to come here and tell us about Eat Our Food in the OJT program. Eat Our Food, Madam Speaker, really, Minister of Labour? Madam Speaker, if these people have no choice, what are they expected to do? Sit at home and look at their degree certificate and say, when would I get a job, boy? Madam Speaker, they are left with no choice but to head to these establishments. And you have heard it for yourself. Fast food restaurants and security agencies. Madam Speaker, on a weekly basis, I am doing, you know how many MTS letters of recommendations for persons holding nursing certificates and so on, just to get a job. It is real, and it is the reality existing out there. Madam Speaker, how many are working for minimum wage, even taking into consideration the new $20.50 per hour, which falls well below what is required, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, and you would have remembered the Leader of Opposition mentioning her recommendation that the minimum wage be raised to $25 per hour. Madam, this increase by the PNM in reality means that a person will earn $164 between 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., bearing in mind the 1 hour for lunch is not paid. Madam Speaker, but I'll deal with this later on. How many, Madam Speaker, are being retrenched, rotated, and redeployed at lower positions with reduced earnings? And this is not me again. I refer to a Loop TT article dated November 10th, 2022. Nearly 2,000 retrenched during the COVID-19 pandemic, Madam Speaker. 2,000 retrenched, reported in Loop TT, yet those opposite delude themselves that everything is okay in this country. Madam Speaker, as I deal with the realities again, what about the status of children in terms of inclusion in this budget? Where in this budget meaningfully addresses this problem? How many have to work for a living rather than be schooled, Madam Speaker? How many cannot attend school because their parents cannot afford food, books, clothing, and transportation, which has gone beyond the poor and vulnerable earning capacity, Madam Speaker? This is not me again. Guardian article dated April 9, 2023. Girl 14 pleads, I want to go back to school. And I quote, the children were forced to leave school or be absent frequently due to the parent or guardians not having jobs, food, or money to send them to classes to achieve an education. Madam Speaker, how many children are abandoned, homeless, and living on the streets? How many children are selling and taking drugs and alcohol? How many of them are now joining gangs and even committing crimes, Madam Speaker? This is the reality of what we are facing in this country. Yet those opposite, Madam, delude themselves into believing that everything is okay in this country. Madam Speaker, reality is, what about housing? Where in this budget are there meaningful provisions and measures for housing? I listened to the Lavantil East Morvad MP speak, and I wondered, Madam Speaker, based on what he said, I am not imputing anything, but based on what the member said, whether his focus as a minister in the Ministry of Housing is on PNM strongholds, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he said so much, but I awaited to hear something for Chaguanas East and other places in this country. Madam Speaker, the reality is they mentioned housing, and I know they would come to say that. Many persons have applied for housing, awaiting 20 years, Madam Speaker. Then somehow or the other, you write for them, they get an interview, and that's the end of that. You get that they are awaiting allocation, and they are on a lottery system. So when would we deal with the vulnerable awaiting housing, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, is this government aware that in some circumstances, up to 10 persons are living in one room? Madam Speaker, how many citizens have had to relinquish their homes because they can no longer afford mortgage payments or rent payments, Madam Speaker? How many are living in subhuman conditions, Madam Speaker? And this is not me again. Guardian article dated August 8, 2023. Headline, Madam Speaker, family in one room. Madam Speaker, how many can realistically afford water and electricity bills? Can you imagine the impending increases, Madam Speaker? How many people can afford to live in this country given the astronomical cost of living? Yet those opposite continue to delude themselves that everything is okay and in this once prosperous nation. Madam Speaker, what about the escalation in crime? Where in this budget is there provisions? Madam Speaker, is the government aware of the increases in robbery and home invasions, especially in Cunupia? The Minister of National Security spoke to this before. Madam Speaker, they are now even attacking schools. And I refer to a Guardian article dated September 19, 2023. Just last month, robbery and break-in at the Cunupia Secondary School. Madam Speaker, how can this government, through whatever strategies, save the life of the next 13-year-old from being raped and, when reported, murdered along with her uncle? Madam Speaker, how many citizens were robbed with aggravation? Those opposite should answer these questions, yet they want us to believe that everything is okay and the delusion continues unabated, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, despite all that has been put before, they continue with this charade through propaganda and public relations. Madam Speaker, all that has been echoed during this debate is fluff and propaganda. Madam Speaker, what I have recognized is the Minister of Finance wants the books looking good, the Minister of Finance is good. Madam Speaker, where are the facts? And today I want to quote from a Calypso classic, namely the Mighty Shadows' immortal classic, Poverty is Hell, Madam Speaker. Where the lyrics state, Madam Speaker, the lyrics state, the poor man living in a winny hut, the children hungry and nothing in the pot. He gone by the neighbor to beg for some rice. The neighbor under pressure, boy, thing and nice. Madam Speaker, if these words are not the living embodiment of the living existence of the population today, nothing else is. How prophetic, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you see, in this country, there lies an inequality at the heart of our financial and economic system, wherein maybe 10% enjoys a proper standard of living, whilst the rest barely can stay afloat, and the mass of poor people struggle to stay alive. Madam Speaker, according to the CSO website on poverty, they have defined poverty as a lack of income to ensure sustainable, the most important word, sustainable livelihoods. It includes hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and basic services, as well as social and economic discrimination. Madam Speaker, the opposite are quick to shout out that the opposition is engaging in politics when we call them out for creating increased poverty levels in Trinidad and Tobago, but it's not us. Madam Speaker, the Trinidad Express newspaper article dated August 8. Headline, family in one room, mom pleads for help. And I quote, Raquel Richardson, Johnson's mornings begin with a plea to the heavens. The mother of three praying to God that her family of 5 will escape the grip of financial turmoil, which she says has ensnared them and made it nearly impossible to survive in recent times. I quote again, Guardian article dated July 19, 2023, family with newborn triplets struggling to survive. And I quote, it is a precarious trek from the family's plywood house perched on a hill. The waterlogged bridge leading out of the house sinks as Rubley walks across it. She then had to climb up an almost 45-degree incline of oil sand and mud to get to the road, which is in a dilapidated condition and cannot be accessed by emergency vehicles. Madam Speaker, I quote again, Guardian newspaper article dated July 3rd, 2021, growing poverty in TNT. Low-income people have smaller chance of survival in the pandemic. And listen carefully, one man was reportedly selling galvanized sheets off his roof to buy food recently, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Children have dropped out of school as parents are unable to provide regular meals, to pay electricity and internet bills to ensure they access online schooling. Mr. Deputy Speaker, poverty is real hell, to reiterate the words of the mighty shadow. However, the government are elected by the masses because in most instances, they lobby the electorate for their support under the pretext that they will alleviate poverty, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But what strategies exist for the elimination and, let's say, the reduction of poverty in Trinidad and Tobago? Madam Speaker, the reality is this must be undertaken within the context of a comprehensive approach. And the minister spoke about all of government approach, but never went into detail. So let me go into some details. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in terms of a comprehensive approach, I want to deal with increasing access to education. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is crucial in the fight against poverty, since it can provide individuals with the skills and knowledge to elevate themselves by securing good jobs to improve their economic prospects, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a mere one-off grant of $1,000 to needy children via the means test would not lift them out of poverty. And let us face the facts. And they know that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And stop acting as though you are giving the vulnerable something. The leader of the opposition, since during the pandemic, would have asked you to give those seeing hard times, as we may say it, a one-off grant to assist with school supplies. You are now coming in 2024 to do that. So don't act as though you are doing something so great. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there must be sustainable measures which are evidently absent in this benign set of fiscal measures, which from page 3 of the budget statement simply outlines a series of fanciful economic and financial micro and macro statements which are merely designed to distract the average citizens from the realities that the 2024 budget is devoid of any developmental policies, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which can improve their current standard of living and ease the burden of hardship imposed by this indifferent regime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I quote Guardian article dated November 20, 2022, education must be government's top priority. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in terms of a comprehensive approach or all-of-government approach, economic growth, another strategy that this budget ought to address was economic growth, which would create jobs and increase wealth, which will catapult people out of poverty. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I refer to page 8 of the budget statement 2024 by the Honourable Minister of Finance. Our domestic economy grew by 1.5% in 2022. Further growth continued in the first quarter of 2023 at a rate of 3%. Mr. Deputy Speaker, economic growth. Given those hollow pronouncements, the population wants to know how many jobs were created. Has the wealth of individuals increased? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the answer is a resounding no. And I quote, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I quote from Express newspaper article dated April 17, 2023. Unemployment, listen carefully, poverty causing crime. Mr. Hines, in this case referring to the member for Laventille West. This headlined article, wherein the Minister of National Security said, in Trinidad and Tobago, jobs are not easy to come by. So money will automatically be an issue that now certainly will impact living comfortably in TNT. Therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where is the evidence of jobs? Those opposite cannot provide any empirical data. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I now move to income inequality, all of government approach if we are speaking that. Income inequality exists where some people have more wealth than others, conversely reducing middle income earners' capacity to sustain themselves. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the property tax will become an additional burden when operationalized. Middle income households are the ones who suffer the brunt of government's taxation policies, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The minister belatedly, after strident calls, adjusted the minimum wage by $3 per hour. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I refer to page 127 of the budget statement 2024, and I quote, Madam Speaker, I propose to initiate action to minimize the country's socio-economic imbalance and stimulate consumer spending aimed at economic expansion. To achieve this objective, I propose to increase the minimum wage by 17% or $3 per hour from $17.50 to $20.50 per hour. This measure will benefit approximately 190,000 persons in the workforce. Mr. Deputy Speaker, he claimed he was initiating action to address the socio-economic imbalance. But what is the reality of this minuscule, this tiny increase, Mr. Deputy Speaker? For anyone, it is the equivalent to $24 daily. You know what this government has granted the working class, Mr. Deputy Speaker? A sandwich loaf costs $14.80. A tin of sardine costs $12.25. This sandwich loaf and a tin of sardine totals $27.05. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you minus the $24 daily, you are still short and have to borrow $3.05 to access this bare necessity, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of bread and sardine. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is what will benefit 190,000 persons in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Social Development wondered if we live in the same country as she does. Mr. Deputy Speaker, yes, we live in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, but one thing I'm sure about is we don't get the pay the Minister of Social Development and Family Services get. And many persons outside there do not get, or they would wish to see that pay the Minister of Social Development and Family Services get. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I move on to point 4 in terms of comprehensive and government approach, all-government approach in terms of provision of financial assistance, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Poverty can only be addressed or ended by financial assistance such as grants and food support. Financial assistance programs usually provide a safety net for persons experiencing financial hardships, enabling them to afford the basics of life such as food, housing, and health care, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This would help persons falling deeper into poverty. Where in this budget are such provisions articulated? They come here to justify and use my name today. They attempt to hoodwink the population. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Finance even stated, and I refer to page 103 of the Budget Statement 2024, and I quote, specifically in 2024, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services will be mandated to restructure the food card program to include a mandatory market box component. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at this time I wish to dissect some real concerns that I have noticed in this 2024 budget, and I have extracted some figures from the draft estimate details of recurrent expenditure for the financial year 2024 under Head 78, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Mr. Deputy Speaker, General Admin salaries and COLA, $1 million increase. General Admin Subhead 01, Item 001, Sub-Item 01. Salaries and COLA, a $1 million increase. General Admin 02, 001, 16, Contract Employment, a $12 million increase. General Admin 02, 2022, Short-Term Employment, a $200,000 increase. Division of Agent 02, 16, Contract Employment, a $650,000 increase. Social Welfare 02, 16, Contract Employment, $790,000 increase. Social Welfare Short-Term Employment 02, 2022, $3.8 million increase. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in total, in terms of employment, $18,460,000 increase. Mr. Deputy Speaker, yet, when superimposed against the core deliverables, which are the initiatives that defines the Ministry of Social Development, in other words, they exist for the following. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to go a little bit on the core deliverables. And listen, households, sub-item 0402, senior citizens grant, no increase, no decrease, same. Households, social assistance, an increase of $1 million. Households, urgent temporary assistance, a decrease of $2 million. And yet still people are awaiting so many flood relief grants in Trinidad and Tobago. Household rehabilitative program, an increase of $500,000. Household 0408 disability grant, same, no increase. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a total under the core deliverables, you have a net decrease. What is alarming, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is there's a net decrease of $500,000 in terms of the core deliverables. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the alarming sting in the tail is the $18,460,000 allocated to the employment votes. So no increase to the core deliverables. Actually, you have a decrease, but you have an increase in the employment votes. Mr. Deputy Speaker, from these figures, am I to infer that a greater number of employees will be required to administer the social services grants, which reflects an overall reduction? Mr. Deputy Speaker, this cannot be fiscal prudence, or as the Minister stated at page 64 of the budget, relative to another endeavor, that the government conducts its business in a sane, sober, and sensible way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not evident of sanity. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not evident of sobriety. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not evident of sense in any way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these sums have not, and we are not against employment, but employment increase and the deliverables the deliverables decreased. Something is definitely wrong. Mr. Deputy Speaker, could these sums have not been used to increase social benefits across the board, even if at the rate of the minimum wage? There's something amiss, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that those opposite are not saying. Is it, or is that deliberate or by accident, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask? Today I call upon the Minister of Social Development to immediately review this serious disparity in the allocations and implore her in tandem with the Minister of Finance to immediately regularize this abnormality. Mr.
Honourable,
Deputy Speaker.
Member, your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 10 minutes. You care to avail yourself?
Yes, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, social services grants must be increased. Mr. Deputy Speaker, under our administration, we increased the senior citizens' pension from $1,950 to $3,000. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we increased the disability grant and the public assistance grant, the funeral grant, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I can go on and on. You, on the other side, in 2015, you met a society that was resilient, and you broke it down. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to quickly look at the social sector investment program in terms of the NSDP. What is really mind-boggling, and I just spoke about the core deliverables, is that at present, under the National Family Services, the NSDP, not the National Family Services, rather, NSDP, the annual salary and allowances for this department totals a whopping $1,221,000 for only 7 persons under contract of employment. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you heard my colleague from St. Augustine. And I want to ask, what did this department achieve? I'm not against employment. However, there must be some measure of cost-benefit or grants or so for our citizens. Mr. Deputy Speaker, minor house repair grants in an entire financial year, 42 grants were approved. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in an entire financial year, under sanitary plumbing assistance, 17 applications approved, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Really? Mr. Deputy Speaker, house wiring assistance, an entire financial year, 11 grants were approved. And this is from the social sector investment program, so nobody could say I'm speaking an untruth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, 42 grants, 17 grants, 11 grants in an entire financial year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, not value for money. No wonder our citizens are out there crying out for help, yet they are saying it's okay. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to quickly move to the National Enrichment Center. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the minister said she wants to ask Mr. Philip Metiver how did he end up there. I want to refer to a question answered by the then Minister of Planning, where the ministers responded to a question and said there are 4 main NGOs that serve persons with cerebral palsy and who utilize the National Therapeutic Center. There are the Care Helpers, the Cerebral Palsy Society of Trinidad and Tobago, the Cerebral Palsy Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Caribbean Kids and Families Therapy Organization. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Social Sector Investment Program, the minister said works are being done at this center. The Social Sector Investment Program reflects that works have been completed. The minister in her speech last year indicated that works at this center have been completed. How the minister is coming here today to tell us that works are taking place at this center? Mr. Deputy Speaker, I received a letter last week, and I kept that letter from the Cerebral Palsy Society of Trinidad and Tobago, asking me to assist them in acquiring a facility. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was trying my best. I'm still trying my best. Based on what the minister has said, you have the Cerebral Palsy Society of Trinidad and Tobago went to the facility to utilize it, and they were told, I am told, that they were told that they can no longer utilize the facility. The facilities, someone in the name of a facilities manager have been liaising with them to tell them they can
Silence, please.
They can no longer utilize the facility.
Silence.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, so when the minister asks who gave permission, you gave permission. Mr. Deputy Speaker, today we publicly call upon the government to immediately provide access to the therapeutic center for these persons requiring these assistance in Carsonfield forthwith. This humiliation must end immediately, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I now move to my constituency. Mr. Deputy Speaker, every one of us would have lost someone close to us through the criminal scourge. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of National Security has finally found some common courtesy and decency to offer an apology to Trinidad and Tobago. But really and truly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's not common courtesy, you know. He's trying to save face, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I ask how much time I have? 5 minutes. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
You finish at just about 1:33:44.
Sure.
Just about
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my constituents are crying out for help. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the former Minister of National Security, Mr. Edmund Dillon, the people of Enterprise have been clamoring for a police post with no answer from this Minister of National Security. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the former Minister of National Security, Mr. Edmund Dillon, promised in this House that Enterprise will get a police station. To date, nothing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at least if you cannot give us the police post, eventually you may see me coming in this House. We asked for the police post, we didn't get it. We asked for more resources to the police, we didn't get it. Eventually, I may be coming here asking for a police officer. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am asking the government to please look at a mobile unit at a central location, possibly the Price Plaza area within the Chaguanas district, immediately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, immediately. Mr. Deputy Speaker, citizens are looking on, demanding all 41 parliamentarians to provide tangible measures to address this crime situation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to quickly deal with the traffic situation in Chaguanas. And inform this government that they need to address the perennial problem of traffic congestion in Chaguanas, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I note the junior minister in the Ministry of Works during the election coming to Chaguanas trying to claim the work of the MP for Chaguanas East by saying that they are dealing with the traffic situation. A bridge which he never visited in his life, Bridle Road Bridge in Gillingham. Mr. Deputy Speaker, even accusing the UNC of building a walkover, wasting money, accusing the UNC that we wasted money for a walkover that is used once a year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the residents Express article October 15, Arjun Ramjatan of Chaguanas. I want to let the goodly minister know. Arjun Ramjatan said this new walkover will help plenty people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the minister arrived when works have already been done, so tread on the right path. Be careful of huffing the work of the MP for Chaguanas East. Mr. Deputy Speaker, flooding. I want to tell the Minister of Public Utilities that my constituents look at the Parliament channel and they have observed your responses as it relates to the Wassa line at the S-Bend, and you need to address this issue as soon as possible. Some of my constituents have even described the water situation, no water in their taps, as ridiculous, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to quickly, the GAP program, the Minister of Youth Affairs, one of my constituents died awaiting a caretaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wrote him twice, and he came here and said that he's doing so much in terms of the GAP program. One of my constituents died awaiting that program. Mr.
MP, you have just about 2 minutes.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to thank my constituency office staff as I get ready to close. They work tirelessly. They work 24/7, 365 days, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to ensure that we give the service required to the constituents of Chaguanas East. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to sincerely thank the business community, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as well as all stakeholders and groups who have been assisting me in my tenure to serve the people to the best of my ability. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you would have seen the results of that in the local government election 2023. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these fiscal measures might appease the vulnerable for today, but not tomorrow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government must accept total responsibility for the failure, suffering, and pain inflicted upon the mind, body, and soul of our citizens. What have they done? What our citizens have done to deserve this callous treatment, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Mr. Deputy Speaker, all I can end by saying is they laugh at our state of emergency. All I can end by saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago is in a state of undeclared emergency, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.